We're officially recording. Welcome to session 4 of the LCAN 101 series, Smart Strategy in Uncertain Times, which very much is this moment. I did send out the agenda ahead of time. We're going to do a quick welcome back, and I have a prompt for you all to think about. But just a reminder, the umbrella for this session is that the only thing constant in this world is change. So how can we get better at predicting it and maybe future-proofing ourselves as we get set up, restart an LCAN, resurrect it from the graveyard, or even maybe launch something fledgling like we have in a couple of our counties. There's actually a framework for resilience and collective impact. We're not going to get too theoretical, but we'll walk through some of the pillars and go through checklists attached to them that you can be thinking about as you think about how to make your LCAN stronger and plan for the future, knowing that the future is uncertain. We'll talk a lot about this messy space that we're in with mergers and acquisitions, leadership turnovers seemingly twice a year in key positions. Even our LCAN leaders and their volunteers turn over regularly. I've been in this space for almost 10 years in Florida, and I'm kind of the last gal standing with a couple exceptions. So we will talk about all of that good stuff in addition to funding changes and disruptions. And then how can we kind of plan for all of that good stuff? Practical tools to weatherproof your partnership. I had a lot of fun coming up with some of these phrases today. And yes, Jenny, I was multitasking on this presentation from Tallahassee in that freezing cold room that we were in. So before we begin, I'd love to know what uncertainties you're facing right now or anticipating / bracing for. It might be a little dramatic to say what keeps you up at night, but that's the prompt. And as usual, to get our wheels turning, I have a couple ideas here leading the witness. Your key leaders are retiring or already out the door. Your funding has ended or will end. Partners are kind of at their end. They've put their all into it. They're losing interest. Things have changed in your community. There's no longer the will for your work. Backbone doesn't want you anymore or is changing direction. And maybe there's a community crisis that all the attention needs to pour into. So, chat, unmute, share. This is a tricky one because I know all of you so well. You're like, how much of this do I want to say out loud? We can be very general. The LCAN down the street feels like.
All right, I don't know that this is really a change or so for us, I'm in Tallahassee, Aspire Capital Region. Um, we never really did set up the Visionary Council, and Kim's met with us a couple of times to put that into place. Um, and just can't seem to get it off the ground. And that makes a lot of these things kind of happen because I feel like that's the one that kind of gives you that long-term vision. It helps with the funding, it helps with all of it. So,
Right. Yeah. Some of the building blocks were maybe skipped over. Not
yes.
not intentionally. It's super common. And even if you had set it up, who knows if those folks would still be around or remember why they set it up.
Right.
Because
Well, because, some of our early on people who kind of were that, they've retired, they've moved to new jobs, don't have the same amount of time. There's conflict of interest. So yeah, even if that was formally a vision council, we'd still be where we are.
yeah. And I hear this one in the chat about rebuilding partner capacity and reigniting the working
Yeah, I
group.
just wrote that in the chat, and it's really fresh in my mind because after this, that was one of the things we talked about in leadership was reigniting work groups, because the there's work being done, out there, and there's like projects being worked on, but work groups as a functioning formalized entity, we need to do some work on that. So next month we're going to bring everybody together and recruit new members, to get involved in the work or to just join in because they're already doing the work, you know, and we want to do it together to support them. But then, like, your partner capacity on your leadership council, like we're fairly new, but I mean, since the beginning and the things that I've learned in these series and, working with our backbone organization, watching other LCANs ebb and flow, like it's been ingrained in my mind, in my head, like it's going to ebb and flow. And that's just the nature of the course, because we're all pretty much volunteers, and what we call our quote real jobs, kind of take precedence because that's what puts bacon on the table. And duties change, administration changes, so expectations change, and so it's just the nature of the beast. And just continue to do what fills our bucket and
Yeah.
keep moving forward.
Thank you for that. It also takes a special person to have that stick-to-itiveness. So we see some turnover in LCAN leaders who are maybe like, this is too messy. I need direct service. I just want something more straightforward. This is can be a really messy space for leaders who really just want a strategic plan and let me be successful at it and stop changing. Stop changing it every 6 months. So it really needs a special kind of person to lead something as ambiguous as an LCAN can be. Um,
Hi, I'll say a few couple things. Um, so Kim and I have become close friends. So I think for me, definitely, I mean, it was a transition to collective impact has been, very different. I came from program for 25 years. So I feel like I'm a year and a half in and I pretty much have wrapped my head around it. But I think, like Jenny said, it's working with, um, a leadership council, vision council that, yes, they're all volunteers and they have their main jobs. And the scheduling, whoa, the scheduling is just more than I ever thought, right? Trying to get things to happen. Um, so that definitely, it takes time, to really embrace and understand, and things are constantly changing with that. And then also key funder. I mean, we have a key funder that's 3-year funding, and it's coming to a close technically this year, but I'm trying to do bridge funding with them and that type of thing. So I think, yeah, keeping sustained funding, and also when you're not as much direct service organization, you're more indirect and being kind of a middleman. It's harder, I think, to really make a case for funding when a lot of funders want direct service with students, and they want to know their social security numbers, they want to know all their information, they want to know all their demographics, right? And we really have to work with partners for that. So I think that's just been different than my prior life. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that. For the folks who just joined us, we are just doing our check-in right now. If you have anything to share, feel free to pop it into the chat in our group therapy session known as session 4. We do know some things about LCANs having been down this road quite a few years. I think the first one started 11 years ago. And this is sort of some realities about collaborative work, about collective impact, about LCANs. First, the work is inherently messy. This needs to be like in the job description for anyone working at an LCAN, that there is no dictionary that comes with our communities. And a lot of this is running to where the energy is and where people want to run. And being able to go with that is kind of a key ingredient. Knowing that the tide could change in just a few months because partnerships operate in super complex and constantly shifting systems where every year there's a new thing, a new regulation, a new tool. And so, what does that mean for us and our North Star? And we don't have any influence over anybody. We often don't have any staff. We're lone soldiers. Maybe we are lucky enough to have a couple part-time folks or hourlies. We don't really control the outcomes that we're trying to influence. No one's reporting to us. The superintendent, obviously, in the county I used to work in, he was elected. So we can't control the outcomes that we seek to change. And that can be the most maddening thing of this experience. In my first year as an LCAN director, I probably cried every week. It felt like I was set up to do the most impossible job of my life, and I had no idea how to do it, how to make all of these people who were so well-intentioned, how do I make these people happy and feel like we're doing something in a year and in 2 years? So I was really stuck here for a really long time, trying to figure out how does this work and how can we all feel good about it. So I kind of took an inventory of our LCANs that have been through some really messy stuff. One of our LCANs has navigated 8 superintendents in the last 10 years and is still kind of hanging on. I wasn't going to say they're successful. I was going to say they're still there. Another lost their funding champion and their largest funder. So the asker and the giver in the same month and has survived. Again, I'm not saying they're thriving, but I'm saying they're still there. And many, if not all of us, have weathered hurricanes, pandemics, political changes, and we're still around, still running strong with 19 LCANs in our network and more, hopefully, coming on board. And those who are with us getting stronger. So the question for us, I think, isn't whether it's going to happen, but how can we get ready for it? So I looked at some of the research in Stanford, Social Innovation Review, the Collective Impact Forum, and I kind of went back to an article that we shared in, I think this was the Emerging LCAN community of practice that we did in 2022, where we talked about this issue of what makes collective impact initiatives succeed or fail. So I kind of dusted this off in preparing for today. And what this article teaches us is that there are three characteristics of what makes for resilient partnerships. And in this article, they surveyed over 200 partnerships across the country. And they had to have existed for 5 years or more to be in this study. So I thought it would be fun just to kick off with a little bit of research. First, research is distributed, meaning it's not dependent on just one champion or even several. 1 to 3 is sort of a red flag. The second is that the resources are diversified, meaning multiple funding streams and in-kind support. So it's not set up just on one major grant. And this is the article that points out the graveyard is full of collective impact initiatives that were born out of some sexy grant, usually 3 to 5 years. The grant goes away, the initiative dies. And then strategies are adaptive with clear direction, but also flexible ways to execute that direction. So you're not always married to the thing that you always did or how it was set up, a decade ago. So this is what the research tells us on how we can be resilient as LCANs. And then within this issue of Stanford and this specific article, they talk about these 4 pillars of resilience. And so this is what we're kind of unpacking today. We're going to go through each pillar and do like a little quiz assessment on how would we answer these questions about leadership. Are we building a deep bench, or is our effort dependent on those single champions of 1 to 3 people? Are we well resourced? Are we funded? And again, we can count in kind. We can count donated meeting space and infrastructure and admin and all the people who want to donate something other than finances. That counts here. But do we have it? Do we have partnerships at the table committed with formal MOUs? So we'll get into that. The strategy piece is we talked about the North Star in our last session, session 3. That doesn't move, but can we be flexible in how we're interpreting that on the ground? And then what does it look like to communicate our work back to the community? I'm pushing for reporting and annual reports and putting publications out there. But even beyond that, how is information flowing? Even when people change, is there a space people can go to and find out about you? So lots of good stuff. This already feels a little icky, I think, to some of us who are like, I am not doing any of these things, or there's really an area that I need to work on. So let's start with this pillar one of leadership continuity. So what this research gets into is what they call the single champion problem. And we see this often. I think some of you could lead this session, at least this part of it, on your own because you have a lot of expertise here. There's one passionate superintendent, one college president, a nonprofit leader who's sort of driving the ship. And when they leave, everything collapses. The LCAN stalls or dissolve, or everyone's just left looking at each other like, okay, now what? Um, and so what we see more resilient LCANs and how they do this differently is they're building that leadership across multiple organizations and roles so that even if you've got the district at the table, it's not necessarily the superintendent, but it's spread across the system. You have a couple different models here, and some of the LCANs on this call have these models. We can share chairs. We can have chairs across system and co-chairs. This is a tri-chair model that the research talks about where you've got people from the different sectors that are most influencing your North Star coming to the table and rotating facilitation roles. I think Aspire had a little bit of this in the early days. A lot of this is like those mapping moving trains activities where you pop into a sector and figure out who's doing what, and then kind of engage them in building the coalition. But this can be really effective in terms of loss. When one leg of the three-legged stool collapses, this stool is still standing. We also see steering committees and working groups, so formal leadership teams with clear roles, again, written out. Everyone knows why they're serving on this group and what they're trying to influence. So that might help some of the earlier comments about wanting to resurrect working groups, needing really clear marching orders, and what is everyone doing when they're coming to your meeting? What are those expectations? Because we can't expect people to donate their time forever without any outcomes. And they're going to tell you no by ghosting you and just not showing up at your meetings. And then more formal backbone and advisory councils. So kind of coordinating the mechanics of this work, and then bringing in volunteers who are going to provide some of that glue for you. As single run LCANs, we can't do this work by ourselves. We really need those volunteer champions to kind of stick with us, but then taking care of them and making sure we're not overusing them, but deploying them smartly is really what the research means by strategic volunteer governance. All that sounds so easy, right? Leadership continuity, pillar one. I don't want to name names of the LCANs here, but we do have a case study I wanted to point to where the founding superintendent retired after 8 years of serving on the LCAN. The interim superintendent was appointed, and then the budget cuts ended up eliminating right out of the gate. Welcome to the job. The key person who was helping out this LCAN, the college access coordinator position in the district office. So what happened? They actually used that tri-chair model. So with one person retiring, there were still two other people who got it and could kind of pick up that momentum. This LCAN has written partnership agreements. So the commitments are within the institution, not the person, which is really important when you lose someone in the central office and in the school, that you've got a solid relationship with multiple people, not just that key principal or college access, college coach. And then you have a solid way to onboard new people to your college access network And it's not just coming from the LCAN leader, but the champions of the LCAN. In this case, it was those two chairs who were left standing onboarding new leaders. So you have an onboarding protocol. This is what it means to be part of my LCAN. Here's our North Star. We're going to get into how to build a one-page onboarding document. But these simple things, I guess simple, not simple, really helped this sort of crisis moment. In funding, so the local community foundation in this case actually provided some bridge funding for backbone support to get the LCAN through these kind of leadership crisis. So the partnership exists. That's always kind of what I say. If you can exist in a year and 3 years from now, let's consider that a success, right? People found value in being part of your network. We're not expecting you to move the dial on attainment in those years. We won't even get the data in that time. But if you can just stick it out, meaning people found value in you and you've lasted, then I think that that can be success. And in this case, that new superintendent ended up joining the group. The case wasn't that hard to make because so many people were making it. This is the thing you have to be involved in, right? This LCAN is really making a difference, and we need it to continue. We need you to be part of it. This is what your predecessor did. This is what it's working on. So that's sort of that leadership continuity piece that we've seen work. And there are some assessments here where you can kind of sit yourself against some of these really difficult questions, and kind of see how vulnerable is your LCAN to some of these disruptions. So if your primary champion left tomorrow, all of you on this call, would the partnership continue? That is what keeps me up at night, is losing all of my LCAN leaders. You are all so talented and smart, and leaders in your community. If you were to go away, and you have, it is a dagger in the movement. It's incredibly hard to replace an LCAN leader. And I bet if you were to leave tomorrow, the partnership in many cases would not continue, or at least there would be a lot of questions about whether it should continue. And even when we think that we are kind of solving for this, it ends up happening anyway. It's happened to one of our LCANs in Southwest Florida that sort of thought it was future-proofing itself and is now in a state of flux. So the primary champion includes you as the LCAN leader. Do you have co-chairs? Do you have a leadership team? Are multiple institutions convening, or is it kind of just you leading the ship? Do you have at least 3 sectors sharing leadership responsibilities? I should have put like career source on here. So because workforce is also emerging as a good partner with funding often, but at least 3 sectors we're seeing be stronger. This one's really tough for us. We're in agreements. This is the future. Some of us were on a call earlier where one of our LCANs shared their 18-month journey to get an MOU. That is the future for our school districts. They're putting more pressure on partners to come to the table with written commitments and clear responsibilities, and student privacy is serious. So we really need to be serious about what we're offering and why we're going into schools. And a lot of this needs to be codified. And that is just going to be more, for better or worse. How are we onboarding new partners? And have you documented how we are, how we work? What does it mean to be in our LCAN? How much time per month? When do you meet? How do you make decisions? Is it a quorum? Is it raising your fists? That kind of stuff people get really curious about when you're asking them to spend their time with you. So if you've checked fewer than 4 boxes, then leadership continuity is a vulnerability for you. I'm not going to ask for any show of hands, but there are some tools to help. So for every, you'll notice each pillar has like a certain cadence. So after the little self-assessment, there's maybe some supports to help you address some of these vulnerabilities. And when do you use these tools? Um, so we've talked about, this is session one, your mission, the North Star, your 2 to 3 current priorities, your teams, what you're working on solving for, how we're organized. This can often be so confusing to people. What does it mean to be a back? It's like so much jargon in this space. Backbone, leadership, working groups. Even going through FCAN strategic plan over the past 9 months, we had to kind of de-jargon what we're talking about and have it make sense to just a layperson. How we're organized. What does it mean to be a network of partners that we're not directly supervising? How we operate, what does it mean to meet, who makes decisions, how do we communicate? Again, this is all on one page, but it really requires some deep thinking about what we're trying to get at and what does it mean to be involved in us, our network. What have we done lately? What's in it for me? What are some wins, current challenges? What are you working on next? People really, especially those who are coming to the table and are new, less interested in what you did and more interested in what you are going to do because that's them. Their line in the sand is today. It's not who you were in 2016. Um, and then how to engage. If you're new to leadership in the community, here's how to plug in. This is a great way to capture new folks who might be entering our town for the first time, and you can kind of snag them into something that can be really exciting. If we're good at nothing, we are good at networking, right? It's literally in our name. So, pillar two, kind of the same format with leadership. So, resource diversity. So, one grant funds us. The grant has ended, and the LCAN collapses. Sometimes it scrambles and then collapses. Sometimes it just collapses. So diversifying resources, that sounds so great, right? Like obviously we all want to do that. Um, so there's this tool, this resource diversity matrix, and I just kind of pasted some cells from the spreadsheet about how you can track resources in your LCAN. So some categories here on these lines. Funding, of course, grants, contracts, local appropriations. Believe it or not, 2 of our LCANs get local appropriations. And in-kind staffing is pretty common across all of our LCANs. In-kind staffing is probably half of the people on this call. Thank you. um, Shared infrastructure, free meeting space, all that good stuff. I've only had 2 LCANs do this, and to my knowledge, do the fee-for-service trainings in consulting. So sort of writing yourself into somebody else's grant and being the convener, the collaborator, the person that kind of holds the grant recipients accountable. This is often more complex multi-year grants that might go through your state colleges. Your Children's Services Council might subaward something to your LCAN, and you're responsible for a piece of this larger puzzle. And then, of course, the volunteer expertise. Um, Volunteers can do so much for us, and we can really leverage the talents in our community when we know what we want them to do. So, legal, I've had LCAN volunteers help LCANs with legal challenges, lots of marketing and websites, and even helping to crunch numbers and set up online databases and public engagement tools. And many of you know how to do this so well. So this happened to one of our LCANs, and they lost their $150,000 allotment. They were given notice that that grant would be ending in 18 months. So technically they had a year and a half to prepare for it. But this particular funder no longer wanted to fund what they called convening. And thankfully gave some notice. It wasn't instant, but it was incredibly painful. So they were allowed to, I would call it quiet panic. Um, But when we went through the resource mapping activity, we realized that they actually had a lot more in their assets than they realized, that maybe they could pool and leverage and make the case to different funders to keep them going. This backbone cost sharing model has been successful. And in this case study, that's what this LCAN used. So they had their 3 anchor partners pool some funding to make up for this sudden loss in some sustained funding that they had received over many years. So the school district pulled some money in from a grant that they received. The community college donated some funding for office space and other capacity within their TRIO program. And then we had the United Way, each contributed. And so you have to really make the case that these institutions are going to get something from this because they're accountable to their own boards and the public. So really finding out what it is that you're able to offer these partners can help with this cost sharing model. Because why would they give this to you when they could give it to so many others competing for these precious resources? And then this earned revenue, this fee-based training for regional LCANs that they ended up offering some fee-based training for some of their after-school partners that were part of their after-school initiative. What they realized is that some of their partners were spending their professional development dollars on conferences and tools and resources that LCAN could deliver. So they kind of pitched it. What if I were to provide that content to you and bring in my, our own experts within our world and then take care, maybe it's a 50% reduction of what your line item would be for the Boys and Girls Club. And so that ended up working for them. And they experimented. It was a small one the first year, and then it got a little bit bigger as they, created some word of mouth success around that. So developing fee-based training could be a way for some LCANs to weather the storm. I did a little bit of this at my LCAN. It was a little bit of a sales thing that I'm not always the most comfortable doing, but when I realized that all of our partners were spending so much money on trainings for their staff when we could be, making that local, it helped make the case. And then also thinking about a temporary pause. Maybe you kind of go back to bread and butter for a little bit and think about focusing on maybe how you got started or what works for you rather than your big ambitious plan that you might have on the books. So again, a lot of this is how do we sustain and build resilience through these transitions? In this case, growing more stable so that when someone else might pull out in the future, we're able to survive. Is this all making sense so far? So, and again, a little checklist. Do you have at least 3 different funding sources? And this is important. We're holding up the mirror too here at FCAN. Does your largest funder represent less than 50% of your total budget? This is a great question. It's a question that you'll get asked with any major funding, especially public funding. No one wants to be your majority funder. That's a risk for the funder, and it's a risk for you. Have you really mapped out in-kind contributions, all the lovely things our volunteers are bringing to our space? There's a great way to celebrate that in a partnership health report. Do your anchors contribute financially? I think Jennifer Libby asked me about this. Has FCAN ever done a fundraising workshop? And I had to really remember, it was a long time ago, and I think it was at the United Way in Orlando. We did a big session. Yeah, was that you, Corey? About
And I was going to say, Kathy McDonald did like a series on it one year.
yeah,
Yeah, but it's been 4 years or so.
yes. So we're expecting our little $200,000 LCAN to change the world. And we're bringing institutions to the table that have like $1 billion budget. So what can those partners, those anchor partners contribute to this LCAN? And it's even modest amounts, like $1,000 earned revenue training about FAFSA or post-secondary planning or whatever you want to do with your after-school network. But are people, what is the skin in the game? Are your partners contributing anything other than their time? So, and again, it's like making the case, well, what am I offering them? Well, it turns out we can offer a lot to our partners. And that is there's, I don't forget what number it is, but we have a session on financial sustainability. And I've got this whole slideshow about what career source, how are they funded? How have they funded LCANs? We've got community action programs in all of our high poverty counties. How are they funding college access work with their youth? And how could we kind of capture some of that in our LCAN worlds? 11 of our counties have children's services councils. Could we make the case for the youth supports and maybe LCANs could go after some of those dollars? We've got one LCAN that gets a line item from their city. Maybe that's a model that we could look at. And so kind of braiding different patterns across the state and thinking about what are we offering our anchor partners and how can we make the case that they should fund the LCAN and to what end? There's a really great model that I love. It's called the Round Table of St. Lucie, and they were set up in the early 90s. And they were set up around a single North Star, which is solving for juvenile delinquency, as it was called back then. And each partner, 30 partners coming to the table, it was all social human services. Each had to make a contribution to this collective problem that we're trying to solve of reducing, juvenile crime and recidivism. And to this day, they all contribute. I think the last time I looked at it was maybe 10,000 per agency. And that funds the leader of the Roundtable of St. Lucie, and it funds some of their work. So that's a model that I love. That's local, it's in Florida, and you guys can go ahead and check that out. We also have some LCANs that in the past have been anchor funded. Sometimes it's gone away, but we can also share some of those examples, and we'll highlight that in that session. Um, when I inherited my LCAN, I had $60,000 in the bank. That was not 12 months of operating reserve. I completely freaked out, hence crying once a week for 12 months. And so best practices that you have fundraised a whole year ahead, ideally 18 months of reserved or committed funding. It could be restricted. Ideally, it's unrestricted, but you've got some sort of cushion where you're not hustling every day for your paycheck or to pay your people. And, have you explored other creative ways to raise money for your LCAN? So this one's if you've checked fewer than 3 boxes, then resource diversity is a vulnerability for you. I feel like I need to have my coffee after I finish one of these checklists. I'm stressing myself out.
Or a big drink.
Yes. 5 o'clock somewhere in LCAN 101. So this resource inventory that you'll get in the learning Dropbox, it kind of walks you through how you can go through this checklist. What does your LCAN receive? What are those like inputs pouring into you? A formula to assign a dollar value, just like all nonprofits do, and they're communicating their impact. But we need to be doing a better job in our space. And then calculating that total investment in your LCAN. And you can really sell that out as you're raising funding. You're not investing in something that's a newborn baby. Look at all of these people who care about us and what they've poured into us. And this matters to our community. You should contribute too. So I love this resource mapping, especially if you're struggling to make the case of like, where do I belong? What difference am I making? How do I communicate that people care about me? All right, so pillar 3, looking at the time. Oh, goodness gracious. I don't know how I'm always running out of time on these calls. I apologize. We will go through this a little bit faster. Adaptive strategy. We all love our plans. Plans are terrible things to have in LCAN world. Sorry, Jennifer Libby. No, I mean, I know we need a plan, but it can often be to our detriment. So we have a 3-year strategic plan. This is what everyone's doing. It's the most beautiful plan. Maybe it was even expensive. And then year one hits. I mean, name the disruption. Come on, we live in Florida. Or the plan sits in a drawer because it's like, okay, that was relevant when we did it 6 months ago and the world has changed. So, yeah, we have a plan, but good luck trying to find it. So, resilient LCANs, kind of like separating what's fixed, like your North Star, from what's flexible, like your strategies, and where you're working and which kind of student or student population might you be working with. So adaptive strategy equals your North Star plus some guardrails. We don't want to be going over into affordable housing. Thank you very much. We're not going to be solving for community health. Thank you very much. These are all LCAN examples. We're not going to be doing kindergarten readiness. We are fixed at our North Star, but we are experimental. We are the innovator in our community. We're willing to kind of stick our neck out and say, let's experiment, let's try something new. Can we do this together? Right? Where there's a will, there's a way. So this is sort of the little formula for being adaptive in LCAN world. We're not changing our bread and butter and our glue, but we are willing to pivot where the energy is in our community. Maybe there's like some hot zip code project going on that everyone's suddenly paying attention to what's happening in 3, 2, whatever. And that's where the fire is. That's where your LCAN should be. Great. It feeds into our North Star. It just might happen to be a more place-based approach than we were thinking. So that can be pretty common in our world where we take our big goal and then we make it actionable locally. And then we kind of experiment with what works. Are we interested in solving for opportunity youth? Do we want to crack the nut of summer melt? What's happening with, high school graduation and, the dropout rate or something like that. So your actual initiatives might change based on what works and what people are feeling, but it all feeds into this larger goal. Does that make sense? That's how I kind of see us when we like pivot and change. And some people might be like, oh, it's mission drift or that LCAN's all over the place. But it's like, no, we're being responsive to what our community wants from us within the container of our North Star. So obviously the pandemic is a great example. Pretty much every LCAN, and the reason why our network is not as strong as it was before the storm in some cases, and now even stronger in many cases, is because of this. All the funding went to direct service, and rightfully so. And LCANs ended up losing a lot during this transition. We lost leaders, we lost funders, and we lost our positioning locally. And this particular LCAN was focused on summer melt. And like so many of us, they were able to pivot in that critical 2020 summer to a virtual and online format that they ended up using forever. Like they never went back to a lot of their in-person work. And this is the same LCAN that ended up seeing huge success with Better FAFSA when that rolled out in 2023 and did a lot of virtual and online summer FAFSA outreach, picking up on some of those skills that they learned during the pandemic and is now stronger than ever and influencing some of these numbers that they had always held as their North Star. So I love this case study. Some of you might know who this LCAN is. But it started as a crisis and ended up being something that made them stronger. So can you clearly state your North Star in one sentence? And can your partners, if you want to be extra with this checklist? Have you identified 3 to 5? I'm leaning more toward 3 priorities within your LCAN. Again, not 15. Do you review your progress? And not just once a year when the new data hits. Have you tested new approaches in the past year? Or are you still kind of doing what you've always done? Do you feel like you're adding new programs to your suite, to your toolbox? Have you ever stopped doing something that wasn't working? I love this question. And when a disaster hits, when something's disrupted, are you able to make decisions quickly, or is it sort of that analysis paralysis stage where you're like, ah, squirrel, squirrel, what do we do? And if you check fewer than 4 boxes here, then you're vulnerable to being an adaptive LCAN. So the LCAN strategy blueprint is another cool one-page document that you can kind of plug and play. And I should have said at the beginning of this session that this is taking an entire community of practice and boiling it into one tidy 60-minute session. So you're welcome. Sorry for overwhelming you, but these are tools that we would normally work through over many months in a community. But here we go. It's LCAN 101. So we're just going to dump it on you. So this is what you need to be answering in your one-page strategy. Your North Star, who you serve. No, you're not serving the entire county. There's no way you can authentically, knowing the resources our LCANs have. You really need to get clear about who you're serving within that population of your North Star. It's a zip code, it's a place, it's a high school, it's a subgroup of students who are furthest from goal. What are your priorities? So how are you doing that? And how do you know it's working? What are some of the data that you're going to track to be able to report out that it matters that you're doing this work? And then are you kind of experimenting with something? What's sort of a stretch for you? What are some new approaches that you might be playing with? And then have you stopped doing anything? What didn't work for you and why? You might revisit it later, but it just didn't work out. Okay, last time check. Okay. On pillar 4, communication, our love-hate relationship. Doesn't everyone just know what's happening? How could they not know? Communication is so frustrating because it's never ending. You feel like you've communicated and everyone tells you you haven't. You're only communicating to like 2 or 3 people. The information vacuum problem is huge in our space, and it's incredibly resource intensive. So obviously, this is a key pattern here with Kim's examples. When the leader leaves, the knowledge walks out the door. New partners don't know who the heck you are. Achieve what? Aspire what? Spark what? Leap what? Whatever. They're new. They don't know anything. And so, what do we do with this problem? People are going to leave. They're going to retire. They're going to move. We really need to understand how to solve for this. And communication is that pillar that we all need to pay attention to, but man, is it a time suck. So trying to make this easier for us and kind of sharing our pain and our lessons, so that our success doesn't depend on one person's memory. Often y'all's, you are the memory keepers. So what can we do to build more resilience with how we communicate? Regular partner updates. I mean, obviously, right? Monthly emails, newsletters, we all know that kind of stuff. Are we doing it? Are they being read? There is so much email clutter. It's really important that you've got great lists, solid lists. Gone are the days where we're like, we have 10,000 subscribers. Okay, how many people actually opened your stuff? So good content that people use and read, accessible documentation. So having a Google Drive, a shared drive, some sort of resource inventory, a public website for people to access, meeting notes and agendas, a calendar where they know what's happening in your LCAN. All those kinds of things can kind of get us to the next level. And some data dashboards. Partners can see progress anytime. It doesn't have to be fancy, but it does have to be available. So case study, again, turnover. Backbone coordinator, not interested anymore. The principal who loved us and our place-based work is no longer. And new partners are like told that they have to join your LCAN in the middle of the school year. Joy. So sending out monthly partner emails with like the same kind of format, brief, with kind of a predictable setup. So Where's our North Star? What are we focusing on this month? And who's doing cool stuff? Who can we celebrate in our work? Shine a light on best practices can get people excited. No one wants to do something impossible. We want to see what works, and we want to see our peers and their beautiful faces and stories. So, quotes, little anecdotes, little news, who's in the news, things like that can be really engaging. And how to get involved. So, what can I do? What does this mean for me? Um, the shared Google Drive can be so important to organize our space and especially engage partners in the work. I used to use Asana and assign volunteers who were chairing a working group to Asana. That was like way too complicated. I was overthinking it. All I needed was a Google Drive. And then, of course, the website. We really need something public facing that explains all this good stuff and also how to engage in what you're doing. So again, all of this is to onboard people, to say this is our stake in the ground, this is who we are, and to maintain some continuity in the turnover space that we're in. So are partners regularly receiving updates from you? Is the first question. Kim's dramatic sip of coffee. Do they know what's going on? Are your meeting notes, are you taking meeting notes? And are you making them available in some kind of format? And again, it doesn't have to be like city council notes. This is just highlights here for people to kind of onboard and get caught up. Websites, one pagers, ways to people to quickly grasp what's going on. And then of course, publishing at least annually. If you get nothing out of this, that hopefully will be beaten over your head. And if somebody left tomorrow, would that information remain accessible? This happened to us recently. Someone left, and all of a sudden, we can't access a major, major tool. So make sure that your information is not just owned by that Google Drive account owner, but that you're creating some sort of continuity of who owns this stuff. So here's fewer than 4, then communication is a vulnerability for you. But at least these questions give you instructions and our roadmap for maybe what you can start working on. And unfortunately, for those who are already set up, maybe backfilling some pieces that were skipped over and that are now emerging as kind of a real problem. This is just a little screen grab of a communication plan. I've got lots that are not screen grabbable that I can share with you. If this is something that you're interested in mapping out, this is when our leadership council or steering or vision meets. This is when our working groups meet. This is what they're talking about. This is who's the chair, and sort of mapping out a whole year in your LCAN world at a glance. Now you can move meetings and things can shift, but at least people know what you're doing and what you're up to. So I've got just a couple of minutes. This is what I'm going to leave you with, is sort of like an action plan about what we covered, those 4 buckets, ways to identify your LCAN's vulnerability. Now these slides you can bring to your next meeting and say, why don't we all fill out these checklists and let's just compare notes. Do we all agree on our strengths and weaknesses, or maybe what we have never thought of before? And maybe there's something that you could implement in the next month or season to start working on backfilling some of these gaps. And just some quick takeaways, because we did cover a lot today. Again, this is a whole COP boiled down into one session. That change is inevitable. How do we design for it in order to survive? Remembering the 4 pillars, those are what build resiliency and create capacity for you to survive. And then sometimes the most strategic move is knowing when to pivot, persist, or sunset. I like to say pause instead of sunset. I probably should have used 3 Ps there because I really don't want any of the LCANs to sunset, but maybe there is a moment when you pause to kind of regroup and reassess. And we've got, I want to say 3 LCANs right now that are in a state of pause. And hopefully their community will find value in what they're doing, because those gaps are not getting any smaller in post-secondary outcomes. So that was session 4. I just wanted to quickly preview what's coming up. Session 5 is all about strengthening your network, figuring out who needs to be at the table, and what are some key positions that we can activate in all of the different sectors that intersect with LCAN world. I love this one so much because it brings some unusual suspects to our table who have surprising capacity. I also love session 6 because we're going to give you lots of links and resources to tools of the trade, everything from the Tamarack Institute to Strive Together to really cool databases, just like all in one session, tools that you can immediately use and shortcuts so that you're not having to waste your precious time digging around for stuff that already exists. Session 7 is about funding, and that's where we'll have those slides about secret, sneaky funding that you can get from your local community because all of our counties have certain agencies that have flexible dollars they can invest in our LCANs. And then planning for population level impact is our last session. We do a theory of change in an entire COP, but we're going to boil it down to the key steps in session 8. Whew, that was a lot. Well, hopefully I didn't exhaust you. Hopefully I energized you and maybe activated something that you've been thinking about as you want to make your LCAN or your emerging LCAN stronger. So thank you all so much. I cannot believe we got through that. I'm excited to see all of you, and I'll stop recording and hang on for anyone who wants to stay on the call and chat about anything and everything.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.